On the screen behind me, we have a list of the past presidents, and I would like them to collectively stand and be recognized. Past presidents. The city and City Club would not exist without our city officials and city representatives. I would next like to ask the city officials and representatives to please stand and be recognized. You'll notice how many past presidents continue to serve the city. It is an indication of City Club and what it means to the city. Tonight is about education. If you are involved in education as an administrator, teacher, PTA, school board, please stand and be recognized. We also have a number of school officials that I would like to recognize. With school officials, please stand and be recognized. Keith, Derek, can you please stand and be recognized? Jason, please, just up, down, up, down. Thank you. I've got the microphone now. Dangerous, yes. On your tables, we have some announcements. And first, I'd like to begin with the China Discovery trip. Dr. Chen.
Thank you, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Hei-Su Chen. I'm the working design and review in the city, and also I joined the Rotary Club and this club and Chinese club. So, very lucky, since last year, the China government from the Suzhou, they visit us. So the mayor Dennis asked me to organize this tour to visit them back, and they are so welcome. We arranged this tour for so many months, back and forth, and we invited 3 tours company to beat each other, and finally the China tour. May, can you stand up? So I think they will arrange the best price and the best route, hotel, the food. We will start June 12th to Suzhou, Shanghai, and Hangzhou, and Beijing, Xi'an. And if anybody wants to continue to make a trip to somewhere else, very beautiful scene in China, And this trip is not only the political, and also the historic and education for the kids. So we will understand how the Chinese people, how they can survive for 5,000 years and still the same race, don't destroyed by other race. For example, the Second World War, the Japanese almost ruined all it. And luckily, the American, all the people they donated their lives and the material to continue in this country. So we would to see their really face on June. And we wish everybody look at the route and everything on your table. If you are interested, you can just call the mayor, that lady there. Thank you so everybody.
There is a full itinerary on your table. And it looks like a fantastic trip. Soma, on President's Day President's Party.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Last month, I announced about the President's Party. And before I go into details, I want to get the facts straightened. Our President announced the party was on the 18th instead of 22nd. I don't know what he was thinking. I'm on his team. Most probably he thought I'm Sarah Palin. The date of the party is on the 22nd, and the social hour starts at 6:30. I am the party planner, and my associate co-chair, Joanne Jimenez. Is she here? She must come on over. She's the party girl. We have been working round the clock to make it a very fun party for you, a memorable one. The good news, I'm sorry I forgot my music. This is our party girl. The good news is we have Park Avenue West, a very well-known band playing, and on top of that, something I did not announce, we kept it as a secret, and it's 2 young performers, always almost professional quality, and 2 ballroom dancers will be there, very young, 3rd graders, 5th graders, kind of. So you cannot drink. The bad news, in 1920, the theme of course is Roaring Twenties. The bad news, we cannot serve liquor. Liquor was banned. I'm sure you heard about Warren Harding, one of the US presidents in 1920s. He had his own stock of wine in the White House. Keeping with the presidential tradition, our president agreed to get some liquor. You know what that is? Bootleg liquor. The bootleg liquor, and that's bathtub gin, pumpkin wine. So come ready to drink that. I would not disclose the person who is getting the wine and the location for fear of raids and police arrest. I hope the police is not here. Don't worry about anything. We are committed to get you the best aged wine for your party. You will visit the No Host Bar. It's a speak easy. Yeah, we are going to sell that liquor. Since it's home brewed, you can purchase at a very nominal price. $4 a glass of soda and $8 for a glass of wine. Not too much. When you go out, you pay more. Please bring small change. Don't bring me $100 bills or $50 bills. Dollar bills would be appreciated. Suggested attire is 20s. Please visit Pasadena Antique Mall and discount stores. There are quite a few. Yeah, there are many places that you can rent and buy costumes or dresses, whatever. Make sure you wear your dancing shoes. It's a must. Our president will dress like a great Gatsby boy. Hopefully his wife will be a flapper girl. Well, my attire is already ready because I've been working on the party. I have no time. I asked my hairdresser, what do you suggest that I should do to make look like 1920? He said, don't worry, you look like from 1920s. Just buy a wig. That's all he said. Last not least, I want to thank our new mayor, Dennis Nair. He was the first to send out the RSVP. We really appreciate for your example, and we have over 100 people signed up for the party. It's going to be a great party. Come with a big smile and leave the hall with a big smile and happy faces.
When she asked to have a few minutes, she didn't include giving the president abuse, but having said that, if you remember, Tim Harrigan talked about the speakeasy that was in San Marino. We actually have a collection of that liquor. The next is former past president Pete Leffler on the farmers market.
Good evening. Thanks for that nice introduction. And it's kind of nice up here. I like this. It's not bad, Jeff. Jeff told me I needed to keep this minimum because we got a lot on the agenda tonight, so no more than 20 minutes, okay? San Marino's Farmers Market is coming to town. It's been approved by your council for a 3-month trial period. You will all receive a personal invitation in the mail in the next couple of weeks. The kickoff date is March 7th, Friday night. It'll start at 2 o'clock. We'll have a ribbon cutting at 5, and it will run until 7 o'clock. And through the 90-day period, which is the 3-month period, it'll be a test to see how it goes well in the city of San Marino. This is sponsored by the San Marino Chamber of Commerce, for which I am the president this year, and by your San Marino Recreation Department. It is turning out to be a fabulous, in my opinion, fabulous event coming to town. We have 30 farmers and marketers setting up on a Friday evening in this town. You will be able to shop in certified organic fruits and vegetables from 10 local markets, 10 local farmers. There will also be all kinds of things from honey and different types of produce and things that are produced locally. There's also, you can eat dinner there. There will be 3 food trucks there, and it's turning out to be a spectacular event. It's the kind of event that I would encourage you to, if depends on where you live, but San Marino is pretty small. Walk to the event. Enjoy the evening, stroll over, have dinner, shop for your next week, cooking at home. Come back again Friday night and see us. So March 7th, I'm almost done. March 7th, I'm done. See you all there. Take care.
At one time I was told it was good to be president. On your tables also is an announcement from the San Marino Historical Society regarding the Sacramento and San Joaquin Delta and its importance to California. This is going to be on Monday, February 24th, and the speaker is Deborah Mann. She is a local resident, and it is bound to be a fascinating discussion. Next, Frank Chen. I would like to make a check presentation to Lauren Kleinrock regarding San Marino School District.
San Marino City Club has been around since 1926, proudly serving the residents of the city of San Marino. One of the major functions that we do is give money back to the community. And this year, the San Marino City Club Board is very honored and proud to present a check to the San Marino Unified School District, the #1 school district in the state of California. We've already mailed a real check to the district, but here photo opportunity is a presentation check to our superintendent, Lauren Claremont.
He's going to try to cash that one, too. Thank you. We need that one. We need that back. Dick Pearson is our co-chair for communications, is going to announce the city club splits, and that is also going to San Marino Unified School Districts in support of technology programs, very important to the schools. Dick.
Well, we have a 50-50 lottery that we've initiated the last meeting. It's been very successful. We raised $160. Half of that will go to the education and technical department, and the other half goes to the winner. And I'm going to ask Dan Biles to make the selection. The ticket number is 884374.
We have a winner. Dick Ward. He needs the money.
It's whatever you said.
Thank you so much for participating.
So our speaker tonight wrote a book a good number of years ago called When Someone You Know Is Hurting, What Can You Do to Help? We have an autographed copy of that right here. It's available online, but we got one here. So would you draw a ticket? And the winner is 884379. 884379. Is it too hard? 884367. Craig, I guess nobody wants to go.
I would like our membership committee co-chair, John Crowley, to introduce the club's new members.
Well, good evening, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure tonight to speak on behalf of my co-chair, Kathy Matsumoto, who couldn't be here this evening, to welcome 3 members into our club. But I'd like, before I do that, I'd like any guests tonight to stand up. Do we have any guests in the room? You've all been officially identified as potential members now. So. I'd like our 3 inductees to please approach the podium. Irene, Lee, and Hasu, could you please come up to the podium tonight. I have the pleasure, first of all, of introducing a fellow Occidental Tiger. And in talking to her a little bit, we realized that while we never crossed paths, while she was in the library, I was pursuing less elevated pursuits elsewhere. But Irene McDermott is our city librarian. She's been a librarian here in the city since 1997. She was just promoted to our city librarian in July of 2013. She lives in Pasadena. She has one teenage son. She's a Pasadena native. And she's a graduate, as I mentioned, of Occidental and of UCLA. For her master's degree, she was sponsored by Ed Tom. I'm pleased to introduce Irene McDermott, our city librarian. I'd like to introduce our second new member tonight, Mr. Lee Bothist. Lee was born in Boston and moved here as a child. He's a second generation San Marinian. And he has really lived two professional lives. One as a realtor here in town after 15 years as an architect in Pasadena. He returned to Boston. He's a Boston Terrier, Boston U, and also attended Temple University. He's got beautiful calligraphy, which indicates that his architectural background hasn't completely escaped him, and his hobbies outside of work include family and 3 children and his wife, as well as art, architecture, and genealogy. His spouse's name is Samantha, and Sonia was his sponsor. I'm pleased to introduce Mr. Lee Bothist. Lastly tonight, we have Mr. Haisu Chen. He's a resident of San Marino and has lived here since 1982. He is a graduate of the University of Illinois Dental School and has been very involved in civic activities here in town. His spouse Linda and his daughter Emmy, who is a student, sixth grade student at Huntington Middle School. He's been a member of the Design Review Committee here in town since 2009, and has been a board of director of the the Chinese Club of San Marino. He is a dentist by trade, and his sports and hobbies include golf, skiing, swimming, and reading and writing journal. So I'm pleased to introduce Mr. Haisu Chen. Let's give a warm welcome to all 3 of these new members, and as we continue with President Fadley's quest for board membership in 2014.
Our first Vice President, Dan Biles, will introduce tonight's speaker. Dan?
Thank you, Jeff. And thanks to all those of you from the school side of town that were able to hear about this and come and listen to what Dr. Richards has to say. I had the pleasure of meeting Greg about 12 years ago, a project we were working on jointly. And he was talking about kids. He'd spent 15 years at Campbell Hall Middle School and worked especially with the middle school portion. And we've told him that he only gets so much time, so I'm going to be very brief. He attributes his interest in brain to study to he and his wife Debbie raising 2 sons and working with teens and parents and educators. So he recently, I read the abstract of his dissertation, which he completed a couple of years ago, and the results of that I think are quite fascinating, and I'm going to not steal any of that. So please welcome Greg Richards.
Well, thank you so much, Dan. It's good to be here. Dan and I have discussed parenting and grandparenting at quite a bit of length. We met under other circumstances, but as kindred spirits do, we developed a friendship based on those common interests and those important commitments in our lives. I thought we might begin by just looking at this brain quiz that's on your table. So there's 2 sides to your handout, and I'm hoping you don't know all the answers. I'll be very disappointed if you do. But just to give you a little introduction into your own brain, as well as the brains of the young people that you might be concerned about. Actually, there's a lot of public policy issues here, as well as educational policy issues that are involved in this research. I first got involved in brain study when I started this PhD program some years ago. And I wanted to be a better teacher of ethics and character development and prevention programs to keep kids from risky behaviors. And so I went to my first brain conference with an eye towards learning better techniques of teaching and how to teach my own two sons, who are very different ends of a learning style spectrum, both very hard workers, but one really struggled with his learning and the other from whom it came much more with more facility. I got to my very first Learning on the Brain conference and immediately began to see things emerging in this very young science that pertain to how the brain processes judgments and how the brain processes risk-taking. And so not only was the brain research pertinent to my teaching of ethics, character development, but it was also very important for understanding how teenagers and all of us kids process making those judgments and dealing with risk. So I want to get us started here by looking at some general things about our brain. And is Phineas Gage up there? Some of you may remember Phineas. This isn't Phineas. This was an artist's rendition of what happened to Phineas. Phineas is an important person in psychology and in neuroscience. He was a supervisor of a dynamiting crew, a blasting crew for the Transcontinental Railroad. And the tamping rod that he was using to drive dynamite into rock caused a spark, and it forced that through the front part of his brain, the prefrontal cortex. And that's become a very important part of us. And he never lost consciousness, he never lost any memory. His doctor, though, would later write that Gage was no longer Gage. And in psychiatric, psychological terms, he pretty much became what was described as a jerk. He lost his friends, he lost his marriage, he couldn't keep a job. So that was one of the first indications that we now, have a whole lot of new information about in the last decade or so about the prefrontal cortex. Each of us has about 100 billion brain cells upstairs, known as neurons. And those make up trillions of connections, maybe as many as 100 trillion connections throughout our body. So I want to just dive into this. We're going to do this brain quiz very quickly. And please just shout out the answer if you know. The average weight of an adult human brain is 3 pounds. That 3 pounds requires what percentage of our calorie intake? 30% of your calories go to support that 3 pounds of brain tissue. 20% of your oxygen goes to support that, 20% of your oxygenated blood. Number 3, the physical consistency of the human brain. Egg whites, raw egg whites. Those in that very delicate tissue, that very delicate tissue is in a hard, spiny compartment. We're learning a lot in just the last few years about concussions and how they pertain to learning disabilities in children and other learning issues and just reasoning issues, behavior issues, and professional athletes. We're learning a lot about that aspect of our brain. The male brain compared to the female brain is? Let me just say before I show this answer that this is about the only good news I have for the men in the audience. So the rest of it is pretty sad for all of us, just so that you know. Okay, it's 10% larger. 10% larger, basically because of physical size. According to current research, we might compare our brain health in terms of protective factors and risk factors to the health of what other part of our being? Our heart. All right, the same protective and risk factors pertain, and we know a lot about those factors in terms of exercise and diet and keeping active and consumption of chemicals and so on and so forth. So very comparable brain health and heart health. The human brain is most plastic, that is, it has the most brain cells, the most neurons, at what age?
22.
12. Right across home plate in middle school. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. For this next part, I want to talk a little bit about brain anatomy, just 3 parts, really. And go to the brain diagram. And there's the 3 basic parts of our brain. Am I blocking people? No. Are the brain stem, which connects to our spinal cord. That is the part of us that controls just basic survival. I call that the survival part of our brain. The middle brain, which is the emotional brain, the limbic system, the amygdala is at the heart of the limbic system, the emotional brain in the center, and then this huge cortex in comparison to other living things, all right, to other mammals and other animals, all right? This huge cortex, if you spread that cortex out, it's all folded up, crunched up in there. The word cortex, by the way, means bark, like the bark of a tree. It's like a helmet. It's over the whole thing, and it's all scrunched in together, but it covers an area that your brain, cortex, covers. You spread it out on a table would be about 2.5 square feet. That cortex tripled its size less than 1 million years ago during a time of global change and global climate change. A lot about that on the Smithsonian website and also at the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History in Washington if you get there. I mean, we don't have a lot of time to talk about it. The cortex is made up of our gray matter, which is basically the areas of specialization of our brain. And then underneath that is the white matter, which is all this insulated connections, and that's what that part is for. The white matter is all those connections. So the rest of most of the rest of our little quiz relates to these 3 parts of the brain. All right, so the survival brain, the brain stem, the emotional brain, and the cortex. So in which order have these 3 structures developed or evolved in humans?
1, 2, and 3.
1, 2, and 3 is correct. And in which order they grow in the human body from the time of conception?
Same one.
Same order, 1, 2, and 3. All right? Is it true that for the brain's cortex, particularly the gray matter, thinner, smaller is better? The gray matter, that's that part that has to do with areas of specialization. And the answer is it's true. That's how neuroscientists, how brain scientists study the maturation physically of our brains by watching that gray matter thin out. And that's how they know when we finally have a sense of physical maturity. We'll talk, that's important. Is it true that our students, or our children or our grandchildren or the young employees that work for us, the teenager next door, is it true that they code emotionally every bit of information that we share with them, every bit of teaching?
Yes.
It is. It all comes into that emotional brain. And you're doing that right now. We all do that our entire life. We so much information now in this explosive time of an information age. So much information comes to us that we let most of it just literally come in and die away. But to remember things, it has to be coded. We have to decide this is important. That's very important for our teaching, not just in school, but in all of our teaching of young people. Well, we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just in a few minutes. And I'll answer that question if you don't mind. 11 and 12. Which is the default portion of those 3 parts of the brain? Where do males default? Where's most of the oxygenated blood, which indicates where the brain activity is, right? Where is that blood going? And staying. Which? 3, the brain stem or the cortex? The cortex. No. 1, the survival brain. All right, let's go back to our diagram for a second. All right, the brain stem, the survival brain, which has to do with fight or flight, which has to do with quick decision making, which has to do with sex and perpetuating the species. All right, it is and it's not a real moral part of our brain either when it comes to reasoning, because those creatures in evolution that only have a brain stem, like a lot of reptiles and amphibians, a lot of them eat their young at birth. So it's a lot different than today when the young seem to stay around a lot longer. But young amphibians and reptiles know that instinctually to get away from mom and dad at the moment they're hatched, all right? At risk of being consumed. So the brain stem, that part of, remember what we said, our brain underwent a lot of change in about 800,000 years ago. A much different kind of life, living in caves, living off the land, a hunter-gatherer society. And the male job was that fight or flight, protection, all right, making quick decisions. All right, last question. Which is the part of the brain that women use the most according to oxygenated blood flow as measured in functional MRIs? It is 3, it is the cortex. The part of the brain that has to do with communication, with collaboration, with cooperation, all right? And with bonding with others. Women also have a huge dose of oxytocin, which is starting to make the popular press, a bonding hormone that males only have at the time of sex, all right? And there's a great neurologist and neuroscientist at Stanford, Robert Sapolsky, who says that every parent needs to have the oxytocin talk with their daughter before she leaves for college, because it has a lot to do with male response and with female response. Okay, so that this is a real important aspect of it. It has a lot to do with teasing and bullying in schools as well, or outside of school. All right, that since for males, the young males in elementary and secondary school, teasing and bullying is often a physical thing, and the teasing and it has to do with the pecking order, who gets chosen for the team, and so on and so forth. For females, it's about breaking up that need to bond with others, to communicate with others, to live in community with others, all right? And so relational aggression is the form that a lot of female bullying takes, of attacking relationships, friendships, excluding, okay, ignoring. So it also has a lot to do with the way that we all respond, all of us kids of all ages, all right? For males, we want to make a decision as quickly as possible about an issue. I would come home from work, my wife would start to describe one of the kids had trouble that day, and she needs to go through the process of the day, all right? And I'm getting more and more anxious as the farther the conversation goes. But that is a female brain way of communicating, dealing. For us males, it takes a lot longer to get that blood up in the cortex. We want to make action. We want, is it fight or flight? How do we solve the problem? And 800 million years ago, that was important to survive. It may not be the same today, if you're driving on the freeway. All right, so the boys and girls arrive at school having had a traumatic experience at home that morning. It may take the girl a few hours to finally process, to reach out, to talk that through. It may take the boy days or weeks to process that and to be willing to talk about that. A lot of it has to do with these default areas of the brain. Fascinating stuff, and we don't have any more time to talk about it. Let's go on. Now let's talk about adolescent brains, which really have to do with children from 0 to 30, as you will see. You know, the adolescent brain on a scan is a beautiful thing. I mean, I've had my brain scan, and I've been to NIH and seen the teenage brain scans that have been used for a lot of this research. And the teenage brain is a beautiful thing. It's much more attractive than mine. Our daughter-in-law is a medical student at UCLA. And she was just describing over the week, for one thing, she got to help deliver a baby last week. But then the subject of the week was more, though, on the digestive system and how it ages. And she said that every lecture began with, this is what you have to look forward to. And you know, I'm already there, what I have to look forward to, and I really didn't want to get the technical explanation. But you know, our brains are the same thing, and teenagers have these magnificent brains. This talk is not a put down on teenagers' brains, all right? They do wonderful things. If you've been watching the Olympics, you see teenagers doing amazing things. We have great heroes serving our country in war who do amazing things, all right? Those of you who are in education see how smart kids are and how many great things they can do. Their reflexes are so much quicker than ours. They do so many things better than we do. On the other hand, their mortality and morbidity rate is 300% that of those in the age group below their years and the age group above their years. 3 times the numbers of bad things happening to them, including death. So we know that there's public health issues involved here. So what is going on in the teenage brain, and how do we optimize these changes that are taking place and turn these challenges into opportunities? And I'm going to have a very brief time to do this. This framework was the basis of my doctoral project and my doctoral dissertation. It's also the basis of the middle grades ethics project that I've started. There's a lot of this is on our website if you want to look for it there. It's the framework of my teaching and what I'm doing here tonight. What we're going to talk about now in very brief terms. So, where are we, Michael? Let's go on to number 2. Go on ahead. All right, there we are. Very briefly, we know that higher moral reasoning by those who studied it, Piaget, and based on his teaching, those of you who remember Piaget and cognitive stage development, Kohlberg at Harvard, who studied moral development, Kohlberg found that no one under the age of 18 achieved a higher level of moral reasoning. In fact, American boys at 18 were shown to show a drifting back to like the terrible twos for a stage. So let's go on to the next slide. So I think that a lot of those people who studied early moral development would be made more aware of what's going on by this brain research of the last 10 or 20 years. Okay? All right, let's talk about 3 big issues in the brain that kind of drive my work. I think you've learned a lot about the prefrontal cortex. It's in the news a lot. It's that part of us that's right behind our forehead. It is the part of our brain responsible for executive functioning. And I just wanted to look at this list, just mention some of the importance of that part of the brain, so I don't leave things out. Tell me if you know people who are in their teenage years or younger, if they have any issues with this. Planning, goal setting, impulse control, inhibition, which is one of the most important functions of our prefrontal cortex, is turning off other things while you're focused on what you're supposed to focus on. Focus, solving complex problems, higher reasoning. It's a time tunnel. It connects us with the past, the present, and the future. Do teenagers have trouble thinking of the consequences, the future results of the decisions they're making? That's implicated in ADHD. It has a lot to do with self-motivation, with working memory. Again, Robert Sapolsky at Stanford says that the prefrontal cortex is that part of us that makes us do the harder thing. It makes us do the homework that night instead of something else. It makes us make decisions that have to do with consequences or with commitments that we've made. It's extremely important. It's the CEO of our brain. Another part of our brain that you haven't heard as much about is the insular cortex. And Dr. Abigail Baird has done the work on this security system or alarm system or early warning system in our brain. And the insular cortex is on both sides of our head, kind of in from our temple approximately. Can we go to let's see if the next slide has it. All right, let's go back. Okay, go back. Okay, the insula is right here on both sides. And Dr. Baird had discovered using functional MRIs, and again, a functional MRI measures oxygenated blood flow, so that while you're doing something, you can be in a scanner, they apply this functional software, and they can watch where the oxygenated blood goes. Dr. Baird found that in the adult brain, that when confronted with 50 different scenarios, is it a good idea or bad idea types of scenarios, that in an adult brain, those lit up. The insular cortex, the insula, lit up because all the blood went there in a millisecond. In the teen brain, it went up straight past that area because what's there is not there yet, all right, not completely. And so it begins, you can see the blood in her work, it goes up into the brain and makes its way gradually to the prefrontal cortex, which isn't going to mature until age 25. All right? It isn't going to physically mature, and it isn't going to mature in terms of functionality and use until about 30. These are all, things on a curve, all right? A statistical curve. So there's differences in different individuals. All right, so eventually the young people made the same decisions the adults made, but those 5 seconds or whatever it is can make a big difference if you're in a dangerous situation. It also is hijacked with peers, it's hijacked with chemicals, all right? And so that's another part of us that is a challenge for young people, is not having that sense. As a parent, you may have experienced the thing that before your child could even get out the words of what they were going to go do with their friends, you were saying no, Because, and I've always told parents in parent education experiences for 3 decades, if a red light goes off in your head, this is a bad situation, don't let your kid do it, no matter what. Well, it turns out that we do have those flashing red lights in our system. And you do have a mechanism that's an early warning mechanism. Dr. Baird demonstrated this on a Frontline episode on PBS. Just very briefly, it showed 4 honor students in the 11th grade, 1, 2, 3, 4. Is it a good idea or a bad idea to swim with sharks? The first girl said, I think it's a great idea. It sounds like a lot of fun. Second girl immediately said, yeah, if you do it with a friend, with a buddy, it would be even more fun. Third girl, yeah, if your buddy knew a lot about sharks, these were honor science students, then you would really look good. Fourth girl, now the time has elapsed, says, I'm not sure, I think I might be afraid to do that, all right? And that's what's going on. A third major area of my work, you can go on, Michael, to plasticity, right here. This critical moment of age 12, when we have the most neurons, the most plasticity. Dr. Geed at the National Institutes of Health, who was on my doctoral committee and continues to kind of vet everything I say here to protect you from bad information. Dr. Geed's labs have determined that at about 11.5 for girls or even younger, and about 13 for boys, or maybe even a little bit older, is the time of the most pruning of the brain, the thinning of the gray matter, which establishes kind of the patterns with which we view the world. Very important for our future and what we're going to be like. And it just gives more impetus to those of us who really care about middle school kids, junior high school kids, young adolescents, that this is perhaps the most critical time in the architecting of the adult brain, is at that time. And we've got to put more resources into education in the middle level. We've got to put more resources into looking at character development, risk-taking, and so on. A lot of studies continually show that around 8th grade is one of the most perilous times. Bullying, in school peaks out about 8th grade. Drug use experimentation, recent studies have shown that 8th grade is still the most critical area in the teenage years. So very critical time. Let's go on to risk taking and getting a dose of dopamine. All right, kids get a dopamine rush from taking risks, from new experiences, from doing something they're passionate about, you know. And it's not just a challenge or something to be worried about. These young actors who were here earlier, you know, they're taking a risk getting up, performing. For us, it's one thing, but for their peers, it's something else. They're getting recognized. They're doing something new. They have a place to share some of their talents and gifts. Really critically important. Good teachers know how to exploit that need for passion and risk and direct it to something positive. And the Boy Scouts who are here is another example. Going out and doing new things in the outdoors. Schools that do experiential education or environmental education have those same experiences for kids, all right? Finding ways for kids to serve and to lead and to be recognized for something positive, or to do something risky and be identified for that. So there's a real important time here in terms of brain chemistry. Puberty is a big challenge today, puberty and adolescence. All right, and puberty has now shown medically, in terms of pediatrics, to be appearing in girls as young as 6 years of age, and boys as young as 8 years of age. All right, that's about, you know, hormones and about the onset of early adolescence, that young. And adolescence, which is a social construct, a social definition, that has to do with when you go out and launch yourself in the world, is longer than it's ever been. You know, in 50 years ago when I was a teenager, please don't do the math, 50 years when I was a teenager, and not the high end, I was middle. 50 years ago when I was a teenager, you know, puberty began to appear from 12 to 14, all right? And adolescents, people were being drafted, they were going off to join the service, they were moving away to go to college, they were getting married young. So adolescence might have lasted, you know, for 4 or 5 years. And now you have adolescence that's lasting more than a decade. It's a real challenge for parents, a challenge for us as a society, all right? It's a whole different world. And it's not as though our culture is cooperating with raising those children. I might say this too, there's no sign at all that brain development is moving ahead in line with this change in puberty. The 6-year-old or 8-year-old, or 12-year-old, 14-year-old still has the same brain from 800,000 years ago. Right? There's nothing that helps support that change in puberty and so on. There's no answer yet. I mean, I don't think that, and I wouldn't know if it was probably, because I pretty much stick to but I look at it because it's a challenge for us in teaching and parenting and public policy. But people talk about environmental factors, nutrition, all sorts of things. I don't think that there's any definitive answer of any kind here. It's a mystery, but it's there because it's very much just a matter of physical examination. Let's talk about opportunities and the importance of significant adults. The bottom line of this is that kids need adults there to function as their prefrontal cortex. Kids need adults to help support them in terms of taking risks, to be that first line of defense of a security system, all right? And so what are some of the ways that we can take these changes in the brain as kids go through adolescence and exploit those to help those kids? All right, so the importance of adults. This slide is just basically talk about the concept of scaffolding, and the picture isn't turning out of the Statue of Liberty with scaffolding around it. But you know, scaffolding is a good descriptor of the kind of support we give kids. The scaffolding doesn't touch the structure, right? But it grows with the structure, and we're there to kind of support it. And when the structure is completed, we just take down the scaffolding. But that's a concept that's used now throughout the school years and also used even in colleges in terms of giving student support. A fascinating example of that is in the whole field of graduated driver's licenses. A lot of the most important work that underlies this brain research and helps support it is insurance companies and others, the government, looking at how people drive, mortality rates, accident rates, and so on. And graduated driver's licenses have shown to be very effective in understanding kids and their readiness to take on adult responsibility. The law still holds student drivers at the same level of accountability it holds all of us. But it's a matter now of the adult world stepping in and saying we've got to recognize these neurological changes and we've got to find a more appropriate way to support it. And I think that is a very elegant way of looking at the kind of support that we need to give. We're still holding kids responsible for their behavior, but we're also saying that we still share a responsibility for guiding them and helping them. Graduated driver's license laws, if that term escapes you, is that at 16 now you may start driving, but there's various regulations about who you can drive with in your car, whether you can drive at night alone, and so on and so forth, so that it graduates for some time before you have a full license the way that all of us have. We were being cut off on the freeway in the rush hour getting over here on the 210 by a young woman who was texting and speeding through the traffic. So we all experience those things every year. As I said, 300% more mortality, morbidity for teenagers compared to the age group above them and below them. All right, another great thing that's coming out of the brain research, and I've been to now over 20 of these Learning in the Brain conferences, so it's become a really important part of my life. One thing that comes out a lot is this field of authoritative, go ahead, Michael. All right, authoritative parenting. And authoritative parenting is a balance of support and of limits. And let's go ahead and show how that works, okay? Authoritative parenting, which is the goal of this movement, it balances limits and support. This is being applied now to schools and student discipline and a lot of issues as well. Okay, and then permissive parenting is all support and no expectations, no limits. And then uninvolved parenting is neither one, all right? A lot to say about that people have done studies comparing parenting styles to student driving records, and whether they text, whether they get citations, how many students have had automobile accidents. And it shows that time and again, that this balance of setting limits and of giving a lot of support is the real place to be. One of the reasons that I love middle school teachers is it's a real calling. We were talking about the importance of middle school, and those of us who like to work with middle school kids, it's a vocation. A lot of people are afraid of middle school kids, but middle school teachers love the kids, they love that age group, and they're also in their face all the time. They need at least as much supervision as kindergartners, all right? It's been said that the teen brain, with all this quick reflexes and all these beautiful scans and all the great things that teens can do, is like a super sports car without brakes, without controls. And you'll hear neuroscientists use that expression time and again. It's a fantastic, powerful machine, the teen brain. But without the right guidance, without some things coming from outside, it can be like a sports car that doesn't have proper controls and brakes. Let's go ahead. All right, this is a fascinating subject, and this is one of my favorite concepts that's repeated again and again at these conferences that bring educators together with brain scientists and neurosurgeons and so on. And this is the whole resilience movement. I'm not going to take a lot of time with it, but just give you a quick example. The resilience, part of building student resilience and helping students have good, strong, earned self-esteem, which is a lot different from the self-esteem movement a few years ago. Earned self-esteem are what Brooks and Goldstein call charismatic adults. And charismatic adults, and more often than not, when adults look back at their life and say, who were those adults that made a difference in my life? More often than not, it was a teacher, all right? But it can be a grandparent, it can be a godparent, it may not be the parent. You know why grandparents and kids are so close, don't you? They share a common enemy, right? But charismatic adults help kids find, this is a beautiful concept, they're islands of competence. They're islands of competence. Help kids build on their strengths. Help build their education on their strengths, all right? Things where they'll be recognized, all right, for what they can do well. I mentioned experiential education. Another huge thing is service learning, community service, where a lot of kids flower and can show leadership. Wherever kids can show leadership in school or service and get positive recognition is very important for them. But helping them find their way and continuing to support them in what they're good at. You may remember a teacher who told you something one time, said maybe you're a good writer or you're a good artist or you're really good at math. And that one teacher made a big difference. It also may have been a teacher who told you something that was very hurtful and negative at some point in your life, who turned you off from something. So charismatic adults are these very positive people that each of us has in our lives. Quick example, principal of an urban school district with a huge truancy problem. And he had the worst truants in the district in his school, and he decided to try some of these very kind of counterintuitive techniques. He appointed an attendance committee of students that met with him once a week. The worst truant in the district was the chairman of the committee. And then the next 4 truants were members of the committee. Their job was to advise the principal on attendance, to follow up with teachers who hadn't turned in their attendance slips, to brief new students coming into the school about the importance of being at school. What happened to those 5 kids' attendance records? They became perfect attendance, right? They were being recognized. There was a place for them. There was something positive they could do, rather than turning to antisocial behaviors and so on. The final thing that I just mentioned in passing was my own doctoral project, which involved engaging parents as part of an ethics class, where kids had 9 take-home lessons to do with their parents to follow up on the classroom teaching. Case studies, interviews, watching a TV program together, or listening to one of the kids' favorite songs together, and talking about the lyrics and so on and so forth. One of the most popular ones, by the way, was a project of interviewing an elder in your family, especially if you had your grandparents available to you to interview your godparents about their life story, what built their character, what their value system was, what they cared the most about. All right, so these are all different ways that are available to us to support kids. I just want to conclude with some evidence of how these things work, and what are some of the things that prevention literature shows us. People who study prevention of chemical abuse, of teasing and bullying, of driving issues and so on. What are some of the things that inoculate our teens against risky behaviors? What are things that parents and schools can do? Protective factors, all right? One of the most important is talk, continuing that conversation. Oh, we've said that before, Mom. We never stop if they're having trouble learning multiplication tables when they're in elementary school. We'll spend hours helping them, or how to translate a verb in a foreign language. You know, we'll spend hours helping them do that. We think with issues of ethics and character that we've said at one time, and why don't they remember? You know, it requires that talk. Kids in high school who do not use drugs and alcohol have been shown in studies to say that the number one reason they do not use is because it would disappoint their parents. That's their number one reason that they give. That talking is very important. Participation in a faith community, all right? Preferably with parents, has been shown to be a great vaccination against risky behaviors. Service, I mentioned community service, service learning, service with the whole family doing service in the community. Mealtime has been shown to be very important. I know that I'm my way over. I'll just tell you, a major study was done of the SATs a few years ago. The College Testing Bureau was under a lot of fire as to who was that did best on the SATs. And I know in this community that SATs are very important. You can just imagine. I've never met you all before, but I have a feeling in this community SAT scores are very important. All right? So a massive study was done. Did it favor urban, suburban, rural kids? Did it favor certain ethnic and racial groups? Did it favor certain socioeconomic factors? Did it favor males versus females? So on and so forth. A huge study was done of national merit scholars, the top scoring kids on the SATs. The number one thing they shared in common, of all the factors that were examined, the highest scoring kids on the SAT had dinner at night with their families. All right? Now, that may not be possible in every family, but meal time's important. Family rituals, family traditions, activities, building that into family life from the time they're very young, all right, is real important. As I've said before, a lot of things have come out of teen driver safety and the whole issue of authoritative parenting, setting limits. Bully prevention, this has become a very important issue. Next week, I'm going to lead a workshop at a national conference on bullying. And a lot of things have come out of the prevention literature in bullying. Parental warmth and support, the parent-child relationship, parent monitoring, internet use, because a lot of the abuse now is taking place in social networks. It's being done digitally, and parents often don't have a clue. Digital rules, limiting total screen time, beginning when they're very young. A lot of discussion right now in brain studies about if little tiny children should even have any TV at all, anything in front of a computer monitor at all. Privacy settings and so on. Parent meetings that are led by the school have been shown to be a real protective factor for kids in terms of teasing and bullying. There's a lot we can do to encourage our kids' moral judgment, to encourage their making sound decisions for their own future and their safety. We mentioned the image of a brain of a young person being like a high-powered sports car without brakes or controls. My wife and I visited an aircraft carrier a few months ago, and one of the startling things up on the bridge, up where the captain sits and up where the aircraft carrier with these hundreds of millions of dollars of assets and hundreds of lives at stake, that the tradition in the Navy of the person who steers that ship is a 19-year-old seaman, a 19-year-old whose prefrontal cortex is going to finish growing until he or she is 25, all right? And is going to mature until they're 30, all right? Sits in that chair and is responsible for that. But what a great image that is, because there's a lot of training. There's the chain of command is there. Everybody's involved, scaffolding that job, helping that young person fulfill that important responsibility. Our kids are capable of amazing things, but this is, again, not a call to put down kids' brains. It's a call for all of us who have a complete brain with a complete sense of dangerous situations, risky behaviors, for us to become more engaged with them. So if we have time to answer a few questions, we have to do that. One thing that we didn't get to is mindfulness. And here's a cover of Time magazine from a couple of weeks ago, how mindfulness affects parenting and teaching. It's on our website if you want an introduction to it. Dr. Daniel Siegel at UCLA is doing all the important work on mindfulness and now has disciples throughout the world. Go ahead to the last slide. Questions? Please.
My friend just got back from a couple years in Israel where the military is mandatory. Do we think we would see the same types of behaviors in our Israeli young adolescents based on the fact that they are required to maybe grow up a little faster? I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, I think that structure is important. You know, I think that young people love structure. One of the reasons that school is such a good place for kids in times of crisis, national crisis, is that there's a structure they can depend on that gives them a strong sense of security. Same as parents setting limits for adolescents. It's interesting you bring that up because Dr. Lawrence Kohlberg, who did all this first work in the 80s on moral stage development, always said that the only way you could quicken somebody's move from one stage of morality to another was through studying dilemmas and discussions of dilemmas. Then he went to Israel and lived on a commune, and he saw the kids there and how they were functioning. And he felt that a lot of those kinds of social constructs in Israel were very positive. And he added then a whole concept that he called democratic schools, or participatory schools, where kids, that whole piece that I was talking about service and recognition and leadership. So I think that universal conscription is very interesting to me, maybe not in the military only, but in other needed areas of life. I don't know how practical it is, but I've often mused about it myself.
You have mentioned the adolescents, the response between male and female, are they pretty much the same, or what is the big difference between the two genders?
Tremendous difference. One in maturity. I mentioned the girls, that plasticity issue of the most neurons in the pruning is closer to 11, boys is closer to 13. The age 25 development of the prefrontal cortex is, Dr. Geed is now saying in girls there may be several years of difference between males and females in the development of that executive functioning. But I think a lot of it has to do with behavior, with relationships, with communication, the bonding, the sense of collaboration, cooperation, big differences in males and females and how all that works. For life, for all of life. Everything from the remote control, studies have been done with babies at Princeton with a remote control, the difference between girls and boys, asking directions on the road. Studies have been done on, just as I mentioned, when my wife used to make me so anxious, and we finally got to the point where she would tell me the end of the story first. Then I promised her that I would then listen to her process it, and go through the steps. But I was not hearing anything she was saying describing how we got to this crisis point because I was waiting for the last shoe to drop. You know what I mean? Other comments, questions? Yes, please.
I was just curious. Are you trying to say that? I think that their brains at those ages are perfect for them. I wouldn't have gone off to backpack in Europe by myself for 4.5 months if I wasn't had the brain I had when I was a teenager. Or Barry Ellison, when he dropped out of college and started Oracle. Risk-taking is important, and it's good to do it when you're young. You don't treat a race car like you treat a Honda Odyssey.
No, but you
want to do more in that race car.
But kids are at different levels of maturity, and some kids are ready. My wife hitchhiked in Europe when she was a junior in college, and the thought of her ever allowing our boys to have done that in this age, at this time, is a whole different thing. And I think that absolutely that you're right. But I don't know that you want to take that and say it's good for all kids to drop out of college, you know, or that it's all kids to be involved going off to Europe by themselves in today's society. That's what I'm just looking at a framework.
Get them up to the executive level as quickly as possible?
Not at all. No, I think that we need to scaffold their development and we need to stay engaged with them at an appropriate time. And I think that a lot of parents now, at the worst time in maybe our history, are allowing the culture to raise their children. And it's a very sick culture. It's a very sick culture. And so I'm just calling for more engagement of significant adults, charismatic adults in the lives of their kids. I think it's essential.
One last question.
I have a question. You were talking about the mail, when something sparks up, there's nothing in between there.
The blood use of the brain? Yes. I didn't. Could you start over because the males are acting like males right now. Right, that's males and females.
But then you mentioned about them being like not all there.
Well, the brain continues to develop physically until at least age 25 for males. Bell curve, yeah, there are individual differences.
So what happens if they realize that there's no one there and then they down themselves in that area? And
I mean, make themselves feel badly? Yeah, I think that's real important. That's where them finding a way to express their passion, develop their talents, their gifts, you know, finding their islands of competence, building on those experiences where they can take appropriate risks and get recognition and then charge of chemistry, brain chemistry to push them on. You know, it's, I don't know if I'm answering your question. Yeah, that's the whole issue that this brain research is showing us, is that 18 may be important for some things, not for others. There's a reason the Constitution says that you can first run for public office at age 25. You can run for the House of Representatives at 25. There's a reason that people have made, that you're 8 times more likely to have an automobile accident before you're 25. Police, the head of Detectives Beverly Hills Police, where I was a chaplain, and talking about this research about her own teenage daughters. And she said, this is fascinating, but she said it's also fascinating in police work. She said, I've argued with every chief of police I've ever worked for that an officer shouldn't be out by himself or herself on patrol alone until age 25, based on her experience. Men and women. But women are, as you know, more mature.
Please join me in thanking Greg Richards. Very quickly, he will be here for more questions if you'd like. And if I could just ask the people who are from the middle school to just come up and say hello. I appreciate that. And Jeff has some closing remarks.
And we'll see you Saturday on the 22nd, right, Selma? And March 18th. Thank you all for coming. Good night.